The year is 1945. The Soviets are on the verge of taking Berlin as the Allies to the west make their way through Germany. Adolf Hitler is watching the collapse of the Third Reich from the Führer bunker. Plans are made to evacuate key members of Hitler's entourage out of the bunker and to a remote command centre. Operation Seraglio. One of these flights carried 10 heavy chests, their contents a mystery. They were under the supervision of Hitler's personal valet, Sergeant Wilhelm Arndt. All of the Operation Seraglio flights were a success. Except this one. Arndt was killed when the plane crashed in a forest near the Czechoslovak border. Upon learning the news, Hitler was dismayed. His personal pilot, Hans Bauer, reported that Hitler was heard saying Arndt had been entrusted with extremely valuable documents, which had recorded the true nature of his actions. These would now all be lost. So what happened to these mysterious documents, and what was contained within them that was so important to Adolf Hitler, just weeks before his death? Konrad Kujau was born in Germany in 1938. Both his parents were members of the Nazi Party, and Kujau grew up a little Nazi. Of course, being born in 1938, he didn't have a particularly long time to enjoy that, and soon had to adapt to life in post-war West Germany. He didn't do that particularly well either, beginning a life of petty crime and arrests. As part of his dishonest living, he constructed a number of false identities and backgrounds for himself. In 1970, during a visit to family in East Germany, Kujau noticed that a lot of East Germans were still hanging on to Nazi memorabilia, which wasn't allowed by the communist government. In the West, however, these would be coveted by collectors. He realised he could make a fortune by surreptitiously buying these items in East Germany, smuggling them across the border, and then selling them to collectors. And so he did. He was even able to rent a shop from which he could sell the stuff. Not content with breaking just a few laws, Kujau had another realisation. He could make a lot more money from the memorabilia if he forged authentication details. For example, he could sell a genuine First World War helmet, but forge documents that claimed Hitler had worn it during his time in the Bavarian army. That would obviously make the helmet a lot more valuable for a collector. Finding success, Kujau continued to forge various World War II documents. He wasn't an expert forger, but he had enough working knowledge of the historic details and genuine articles he could use to bolster the credibility of the documents to fool collectors. Kujau could also paint, and similarly, while he wasn't a master, he was skilled enough to replicate sought-after paintings and pass them off as the original. One of the famous painters he ripped off was, of course, Hitler. By the late 70s, Kujau was a fairly confident forger and decided to take the next logical step, fabricating Hitler's diaries throughout the entirety of the war. He spent a month practicing Hitler's handwriting, took an old notebook, attached a black ribbon from a genuine SS document, and fixed it to the cover using a German army wax seal. Then he aged the book by applying tea to the pages and beating the dogshit out of it against his desk. Volume 1. Gerd Heidemann was born in Germany in 1931. As a child, he was a member of the Hitler Youth. I think I'm reaching the upper limits of how many times YouTube will let you say Hitler in a video before casting you off to a life of financial destitution. In his adult life, Heidemann worked as a photographer and journalist. He was a very enthusiastic researcher to the point where he would become obsessed. In 1973, he was photographing pictures of Hermann Göring's old yacht, Karin II, when he decided to buy it, putting himself into financial trouble. In his research of the yacht's history, he interviewed Göring's daughter, Ada, and the two began an affair. Fuck's sake. Through Ada and his ownership of Karin II, he was introduced to a circle of former Nazis. He would host parties on the yacht, and former SS generals would be guests of honour. What the fuck? Imagine it's the 70s and you're on a yacht in a party with legitimate Nazi generals. That sounds like a fucking acid trip. And it was the 70s, so we can't discount the possibility there was acid there. There exists a period of time where it would have been possible to take LSD at a yacht party where Nazi generals were present. How strange. Kujau showed the first volume of his Hitler Diaries forgery to one of his regular customers, who was impressed and wanted to buy it. Kujau refused to sell it, but let him borrow the book. The customer began showing the book to people, taking it to former Nazi Party archivists and asking if it was real, and after some study, it appeared to them as if it was. News of the diary's existence began to spread through the former Nazi circles, and eventually Heidemann found out about it. He had to know more. Heidemann asked the customer for his source, but he refused to tell. Instead, he asked Kujau if he would be willing to meet the journalist, but Kujau continually refused to reveal himself. The customer wouldn't tell Heidemann who he got the book from, but he did tell him the diary originally came from a plane crash. Kujau had read Hans Bauer's book and decided that among the mysterious contents of Hitler's documents that were lost were his personal diaries. After a year of trying to find more information about the diary's source, Heidemann travelled to the area of the supposed crash, and sure enough, it was true. The plane really had crashed there. The graves of the flight's crew were found. The locals had happened upon the crash site before officials, so who knows what could have happened to the documents. Heidemann was determined to get his hands on Hitler's diaries. As a journalist, publishing something like that is a career-defining move, not to mention his apparent personal interest in the old Nazi shite. For someone like him, it was like the Holy Grail. Feel like I might have committed some irredeemable act of blasphemy there by comparing Hitler's diary with the cup Jesus drank from at the Last Supper. Well, guess I'll be damned. Heidemann managed to secure a large investment from his newspaper's publishing company to be used in the acquiring of Hitler's diary. With this, he was able to confirm a meeting with the elusive Kujau. The first meeting was in 1981. Kujau explained there were 27 volumes of Hitler's diaries, along with a number of miscellaneous writings and paintings. They were unable to agree on a deal for the collection, but as a sign of good faith, they made a trade before continuing negotiations in the weeks following. Heidemann gave Kujau one of Göring's uniforms, and Kujau gifted one of Hitler's paintings. Both items were fake. In a later meeting, they were able to come to an agreement for the first few volumes. The rest would come later, as they had to be smuggled in from East Germany by Kujau's contacts. In reality, he just had to write them. And write them he did. He wrote an astonishing amount, thousands and thousands of pages, covering Hitler's daily life all throughout the war. Kujau was reading a lot about Hitler to keep the dates as accurate as possible. He tried to make everything from speeches to ceremonies to promotions consistent with historic records. What he was doing was actually pretty incredible. To Kujau, Heidemann explained that he was merely a middleman for the newspaper and had little say in how much money they were prepared to offer. They were somewhat hesitant over the risk of the diaries being fake. To the newspaper, Heidemann explained, Kujau needed more and more money, as smuggling in the books had brought unwanted attention and more people had to be bribed. In reality, Heidemann was playing both sides and pocketing the money for himself. He lived very handsomely off the money and started buying even more Nazi memorabilia for himself, including off Kujau, which of course were all fake. What happens when two con men meet? They con each other. Amazing. Heidemann's employers at the newspaper were keeping the diary's acquisition a secret until they could publish. They brought in some people to verify the authenticity of the pieces, but they were shown only very small portions. On top of this, there were miscommunications to the historians that may have biased them in their evaluations. For example, telling them the pages had already been chemically analysed and found to be consistent with documents of that time, when this was in fact not true at all. Everyone believed the diaries were genuine, and it seems everyone's belief was in part based off someone else's belief. As the dealings continued, the newspaper started showing samples to other companies and negotiating the sale of copies of the complete diaries for publication. Lots of newspapers wanted to run stories on the newly discovered Hitler's diaries, and the whole thing was set to make a lot of money. And then everything was published. Even the Sunday Times published stories on it. This opened up the diaries to a wave of skepticism from historians. The newspapers tried to defend the diaries, but when they were sent off for forensic evaluation, the jig was up. There were materials present in the diaries that would not have been available decades ago. Careful examination of the ink revealed it had been written within the previous 2 years, and Kujau's accounts contained a number of errors. His handwriting wasn't an exact match, and the signature was well off. To an expert, the diaries were actually pretty shit forgeries. Heidemann and Kujau both gave each other up and were both charged with defrauding Heidemann's newspaper for 9 million Deutsche Marks. This came as a shock to Kujau, who only received 1.5 million. Heidemann himself had kept 1.7 million, and even after a lengthy investigation, at least 5 million was still unaccounted for. The trials saw a few humorous things happening, such as one of the judges falling asleep and being removed from the case. At times, the two men would resort to insulting each other during court. In 1985, Heidemann was sentenced to 4 years and 8 months in prison. Kujau was sentenced to 4 years and 6 months. Many editors and writers lost their jobs over the debacle, and historians who had verified the diaries before publication had their credibility permanently tarnished. As for the two boyos, after his release, Kujau became a sort of cult figure, and he prospered selling forgeries of paintings signed with his own name. There was really a demand for original Konrad Kujau forgeries, so much so that there were even forgeries of his forgeries. I shit you not. Of course, never one to let a good thing go unabused, he was also caught forging driver's licenses. He died of cancer in the year 2000. Heidemann has reportedly spent the rest of his life struggling with financial problems. A bizarre conclusion to a bizarre tale, but we're still left with questions. What were those important documents Hitler lost to the crash in 1945? What happened to them? Where are they now? Where the fuck did that 5 million disappear to?
Just imagine, you were sitting at a table and somebody offered 2 million if you could acquire the diary of Hitler. Obviously after subtracting his own 10%. Well, yes, I got 10 days to think it over, and then I said yes, for understandable reasons. 2 million is a lot of money, right?